And hello, everyone. Welcome. I believe everyone has been muted. Welcome to the Symposium for Inclusive Philanthropy. We have a number of sessions planned over the next 2 days. It's my honor to be kicking off the very first session here. This is a little new for us. We've never done a virtual event. And we're pretty excited about the content that we have planned for everyone. I'm going to dive into this in just a moment here because I've got a lot to cover. And we've got a great session immediately following mine with some of our more talented grant writers on the evaluation committee that are going to talk about common grant proposal questions. So that's coming up right after this. But we're going to start with a presentation that I call Nonprofits Under the Hood. I'm Dave Moss. I'm Unfunded List founder. And as I said, I welcome you to the symposium. And if we could go to the next slide, we have terrific support today from OpenGov Hub, our co-working space where we work, and particularly from the Catalysts. Ahmed, Udit, and Tasha are giving us a lot of help, and we really appreciate it. So anyway, here is, that is, believe it or not, that's a picture of me. Mom will probably recognize it. This is my Tinder profile pic. This is when I was 18 years old. I was heading off to college, and I'm currently 19. I've aged a lot over the last year. But in all seriousness, in my career, I've worked as a fundraiser. I've also worked as a partnerships director, and I have had the privilege to make grants with a number of grant-making foundations. And in all of those roles, being able to research the nonprofits that I was considering working with or currently working with or having meetings with was very helpful. And I should mention, I am not like a researcher. I think there are people out there who do terrific nonprofit research, looking at trends, poring over data, graphs, and that sort of thing. It's not really what I do. I am a pitch man, right? And often I was looking for, looking to partner with a nonprofit. Particularly when I was at Atlas Corps, I was looking to place international fellows at American-based nonprofits. And then when I was at the Public Foundation, I was looking to work with nonprofits on their advertising. And then just when I was considering being a grant maker, or here now when I'm at Unfunded List and we're reading a proposal, it's always very helpful for me to go and look at the publicly available information on nonprofits. So could we go to the next slide, please? So I use the phrase pull a 990 pretty often, right? I make sure to always stretch before I pull one so I don't injure myself. There's a variety of ways that you can pull a 990. A 990 is the tax return that 501c3s file every year. Margaret, our managing director, is doing a session later today, models of social formation, which will go in a little bit more detail about 501c3s, and we're also going to talk about them in some of the other sessions as well. But hopefully everybody has at least heard the term before. 501c3. These are tax-exempt organizations based in the United States. Unfunded List is a 501c3, and all 501c3s file paperwork with the IRS every year. And there's we don't have to pay taxes, but we do need to prove that we're passing the public support test and doing everything appropriate. Margaret, our managing director, works with Stephanie Skrzkowski, and the firm is called 100 Degrees, I believe. She's our comptroller, and we get all of our paperwork in every year. And you can look that up. I think most people know about GuideStar for pulling 990s. You can actually go directly to the IRS. There's a resource they have on their website. I go to the ProPublica Nonprofit Explorer tool. If you could, in the chat, Ahmed, there's that link for ProPublica's research page. If you could just share that in the chat with everybody. ProPublica, as you may know, is a journalism organization, writes lots of stories on a variety of topics all over the world. And so I imagine they research the nonprofit sector occasionally. Sure, thank you, Christina. So Christina has pointed out she's from Canada. We do have several folks who are from other countries. In Canada, I believe there is a version of this, but 501c3 it's the section of the American tax code that allows for tax exempt organizations. Again, Margaret's going to go into like a little bit more detail about the business stuff, but basically, like, we don't have to pay most taxes, we have so we don't have to pay most taxes. We pay employment taxes when we have staff members, and so you get to see salaries and stuff in the tax return, which we'll get to in a moment. There are other countries there's many other countries, and they pretty much all run their NGO sector differently. I'm most familiar with America. That is where most NGOs are based. If you're trying to fundraise from American donors, you're going to have a 501c3 based in the US, and people are going to be allowed to pull them. There is like over 1 million registered 501c3s with the IRS, and there's a lot of information that can be gleaned from there. And we're going to look at. I've done some research. I've read some 990s over the past couple of weeks, and I've pulled some screenshots. We're going to look at some of the information that you can find by looking at these complicated tax forms. So can we go to the next slide? Yes. Yeah, there we go. So this is from the very first 990 that Unfunded List filed. This is the page that lists our board members. So at the very least, you want to pull a 990, you can see all of the board members from the organization for that year. You can also see if any of them were compensated. And as you can see, in our first year, none of us were, including me. I did not get paid. I believe the maximum, it says average hours per week. It says 40 hours. I think that's the maximum you can put. I'm pretty sure I was working more than 40 hours a week on the project back then. But this is a pretty standard page. And if the board members are being compensated, it will show that in reportable compensation, which you can see actually. So if you go to the next slide, 2016, hey, look at that. I got a little bit of a pay bump. Brought home $14,900 that year. And which made me tax exempt, because that's below the threshold to file. So I didn't actually have to file that year. But you can see we also added some new board members, Ashley and Peter, and I believe we added Jennifer that year. They'll be Ashley and Peter are both speaking during the symposium. And then we'll see that the organization continues to grow. Go to the next slide, please. And look at that. 2017, I started making the big bucks, $38,688, which I am sorry to inform you that trend did not continue. This is the most I made in a year. I think it was somewhat similar the following year and the year after that. But we are. I thought I would start off with some radical transparency here. You can look up the board members. It's going to be it's in part 4, which will be in the first few pages of a 990 when you pull one. And you see all the board members, and usually in these, like in Nonprofit Explorer or in GuideStar. So let's say you were researching Peter Williamson. You could search for Peter Williamson's name, and the 990 would show up in that search tool. Lots of different ways you can use this board list to find out information. Maybe one of the board, maybe you pull a 990 because you're interested in the organization, one of the board members, and then now you can reach out or whatever. At the very least, you'll know how much folks are making. I know with other nonprofits, some people are concerned with executive compensation. At some nonprofits, they're so funded that sometimes CEOs and others get overpaid. And you can look that information up here. And as you can see, not really the case at Unfunded List, although hopefully someday. All right, so move on to the next slide. We're going to look at, so our host today is Open Gov Hub. Open Gov Hub is part of is a program of a nonprofit called Global Integrity. So looking them up is a little bit more complicated than a small nonprofit like Unfunded List. So this is the top sheet from Global Integrity's 990. And as you can see, it's got how many contributions they received, and how much they make in program service revenue, right? How much they pay in salaries, how much they give out in grants. Lots of very useful information. This top sheet is available for every single registered 501c3. It takes just a couple moments to look this stuff up. If you're going to have a meeting with someone in a nonprofit, I think it's, I've made it a habit in my life to just always make sure I know this information when I go in, so you can just sort of understand like where they are in the world, right? But however, that can be tricky, right? OpenGov Hub, for those of you who don't know, is a co-working space based here in Washington, D.C. All the members are nonprofits, I think, focused on open government transparency. I think we have some consultants who work with nonprofits as members as well, but very NGO, civil society type place. And they make some earned revenue from rent. We pay rent to them and everything, which is showing up here in the program service revenue. But Open Hub is just one program of global integrity. So these numbers show us the entirety of the program, and makes it a little bit more difficult for us to know what's up with Open Hub. But sometimes you can figure it out. Please go to the next slide. Global Integrity has got a really great 990. I believe on the tech guide, there's a link if you want to share that in the chat. Global Integrity works globally, has a number of programs, makes program revenue, gets grants, gives grants. So they were a pretty good example for how to look at 990. So as you can see here, this is, if you just keep going into section 4, most nonprofits will list their like major programs. And you can see here, the second one they list is Open Hub. So you can get a little bit of a description of what this program is, and then you can see how much money they bring in, give out, and their expenses for that specific program as compared to some of the other programs. This can become pretty useful because, right, when they go to the IRS, they have to tell them like what they're actually spending on it. But in their own materials, their press releases, their website, their podcast appearances, right, they don't necessarily have to tell you all these numbers. They can make a program that they're not spending that much money on seem like it's a bigger deal, right, and vice versa. This gives you the real picture, because they sent this to the IRS, and by the time you're looking at it, it got approved. So you can rest assured this is accurate information. Keep going with to the next slide, please. So they also do a lot of work internationally. For our folks who are working internationally, that can be very helpful when you're looking at these documents. You don't get like the full picture when you're looking at 990. This is something I should warn everyone, like take everything you look at with a grain of salt. I apologize, I'm getting a scam phone call, someone about my health insurance probably. So as you can see, so Global Integrity, this is a good example because they work, sort of all over the globe, and they've got, and they're spending money on programs in a lot of different places, and they have to report that to the IRS. And if you are considering doing a partnership with them around your work in South America or North America or Europe or Sub-Saharan Africa or something, it could be very helpful for you to know where this funding is going. And you can also see, right, that clearly they're doing some in Europe, a very large number of grants. I actually don't really know. I believe it's research. I'm really not sure. I don't work for Global Integrity. I've just poured over their 990. But for those of you working internationally, this can be very helpful if you're trying to partner with a 990 that is also working internationally. They're going to be, the IRS has a lot of interest in knowing like how they're spending money abroad, as you might imagine. So they have to report all of that. Let's go to the next slide. This is fun. They also show their grants, their domestic grants, and look at that, unfunded list. We won $5,000 from them, which you can see very clearly here. It was an internal grant, so like members of the hub were able to apply. We applied and we won $5,000. And Global Integrity then properly filed their 990, and it then later became publicly available. Right, so you can see that this happened. You can also see that they've got some. This is a nice list of grantees to be on here with UCSB and Columbia University. I'm terribly sorry. I should. All right, yeah. So you can look up, and this is true for like any grant making organization. Their 990 is going to list all the grants that they've given out. So if you're a fund seeker, you can go to lots of foundations list. Thank you very much, Heather. Lots of foundations list their grantees on their website and talk about their priorities. And there's lots of places that you can get that information, or you can use a resource like Instrumental, or something like that to get information on grants that you can apply to. But you can also pull the 990 of the grant maker that you're focusing on, and you can, they'll almost always list the full list of organizations that they give grants to and the amounts. So you can look in there and make sure and like try to figure out like what do all the groups that they give grants to have in common, what are the grant amounts, and try to just get as much information as you can about that program before approaching them. Let's go to the next slide. So next we're going to look at the Donald J. Trump Foundation. This is a family foundation from an American family of some notoriety. Some of the members have become elected officials. The family foundation has been forced to shutter by the Attorney General of New York for bad behavior. Foundation have rules that they have to follow. This particular foundation chose to repeatedly not follow those rules. And interesting thing that happened to me, you may recall, one of the Trumps ran for president successfully several years ago. And there was a story that's come up several times, has now been in the news recently, around his personal tax returns, which we have not yet seen, because he's choosing not to release them. And his accounting firm, Mazars, has been sued, and people who work for him and lots of others, current subpoenas from the Department of Justice, all trying to get to his personal tax returns. For the entire time that that's been happening, his foundation returns are available to the public. And I actually, in 2015, I contacted a number of, just before I found it on Funded List, I contacted a number of journalists trying to see if I could get them to write a story about it. No one was really interested at the time. But about a year later, the Attorney General of New York, where the foundation is registered, really started looking in at some of the information, and they have now been forced to shutter. We're going to talk about it. We are a nonpartisan organization. I personally am not a fan of any of the elected Trumps, but as a Funded List, our mission is to educate the public about philanthropy. And so I think the former president's foundation and how it works is definitely within our purview to look at. So I have, one of the reasons why I like ProPublica's Nonprofit Explorer tool a little better than GuideStar, which is what most people use, is GuideStar only shows you 3 years of 990s. I think if you get the platinum membership, you can get more than that, but with ProPublica, you can go back all the way. So over the last week, I have looked at like 20 years of Trump Family Foundation 990s. I looked at them, so you don't have to. There's like it is pretty fascinating to look at. Generally, what you see is that he was the purpose of a family foundation is a vehicle for the family to make philanthropic gifts, right? And they have requirements that they're supposed to meet with the IRS, including, most notably, they have to give away 5% of the foundation's endowment every year. But they also have to meet regularly. They have to do a variety of things. There's also local level registration that they have to do. Unfunded List is registered in the state of New York. The Trumps are not allowed to run a nonprofit in the state of New York anymore without considerable oversight. So let's go to the next slide. We'll take a look at some of the information that can be gleaned from looking at this family foundation. So right off the bat, you can see just some screenshots from the first couple pages. See a lot of very familiar names, including people who've recently been arrested, brought in on charges. Also, you'll see the Trump himself, fairly involved. Is his actual signature on most of the returns, which you may recognize there. And then also the firm Mazars that's being sued over his personal return. They're the ones who filed this. Notably, I looked at several decades worth of these 990s. They ask for an extension every single year. They do like a lot of amending. They do publish the full grants list for every year. And there's a lot of really great organizations that received gifts from the Trump Foundation. Like they did give grants out. If you, like I was saying earlier, when you're looking at a grant list, you want to figure out like, what do all these people have in common? Why are they getting these gifts? And I can't prove everything, but most of the gifts that came from this foundation, and you're all free to pull any 990 you want and look the list over yourself. You'll see the thing that they all have in common is that they all have fancy events in Manhattan. And I think if someone were to do their research, they'd probably find out that those gifts were being used to buy tickets at tables so that Trump could attend, so that he could, right, because it helps his business to be seen about town and to be attending galas of that sort. You are like straight up not allowed to do that. If you buy a ticket like for an event, you can't cause the foundation to like sponsor the table for you. You're not allowed to receive any services in exchange for grants that your foundation gives. And it doesn't, like, I could just look at a couple years worth of grants lists and see that, like, very clearly that's what he was doing. Tomorrow we are going to hear about some legislation under consideration from some folks in the U.S. Senate. And one of the things that they are considering doing is better funding for the IRS so that they can do more oversight of these foundations. The IRS has been through some cuts over the last few years, and they're not always, and these well-funded family foundations are able to get away with this stuff a lot because they have Mazars covering their back and everything. And so a better funded IRS would be able to catch this sort of thing more often. Can we go to the next slide, please? Take a look at, see what more information we can get. And also there is that letter from the New York Attorney General, Letitia James. If we could share that in the chat. Yeah, so this is a press release from the governor of New York. So he was ordered to pay out $2 million. And if you pull his 2019 990, you'll see that they did make these grants. They made them to a bunch of organizations that I like a lot, actually. One of them went to Martha's Table, which is based here in DC. Another grant went, Mom, you might get a kick out of this. He made one of those this is the $2 million he was forced to give away. Went to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial. And it was all while he was president. So I think the DC grants was some, like, the reason he focused on DC was, for that reason, trying to look community-based or whatever. I really couldn't figure out if he was able to choose which nonprofits he gave to or not of that $2 million when he was ordered. I tried to figure that out and I couldn't figure it out. Anyway, in that press release, you'll also see the list of 19 admissions that they had to admit to. And it's worth looking through all 19 because it gives you a pretty good picture of like what they were using this foundation for. And it's all just like right there out in the public. A better funded IRS or state agencies might have caught it a lot earlier. In particular, you can see there's a lot of stuff in the 19 admissions. This is the main thing here. And this is just for pretty brazen. From 1999 to 2018, did not provide oversight, did not set policy or approve directions, right? Did not propagate written criteria for consideration, didn't monitor grants, had no protocols, nothing. Like, what this says to me is that I was right. Like, this was about attending events, right? And other things. There's a bunch of more detailed admissions in there. I think the next one, could go to the next slide, I believe. So I chose one, yeah, this is the craziest of the 19 admissions. You may have heard of this. You may have heard that this happened. It's somewhat of a news story. I'm going to read this out loud because I think that'll be fun for the folks. On March 1st, 2014, the Unicorn Children's Foundation, a Section 501c3 organization that provides support to children and young adults with developmental communication and learning disorders, held its 14th annual gala at the Mar-a-Lago Club in Palm Beach, Florida. Mr. Trump attended the event. A painting of Mr. Trump, this is the painting, was donated as an auction item, and Mr. Trump bid $10,000. Mr. Trump caused the foundation to donate $10,000 to the Unicorn Children's Foundation. After the auction, hotel staff at the Trump Hotel in Doral, Florida, placed the painting in a storage room and later hung it in the hotel. In November of 2016, Doral hotel staff removed the painting from the hotel and returned it to the foundation. Also in November 2016, the Doral Hotel paid $185.82 plus interest to the foundation as compensation for the fair rental value of the painting. And then in December, the foundation filed an IRS Form 4720 reporting the transaction. The Trump entity that owns the Doral Hotel paid excise taxes and interest in the amount of $8.49 and $18.48 respectively for each of 2014 and 2015. In 2019, as part of the resolution of this special proceeding, again, that's the resolution that dissolved the foundation, one of the individual respondents reimbursed the foundation for $10,000 that the foundation paid for the painting. And so the cause to donate means that he made the foundation he bid $10,000 himself and then had the foundation bid it. which you're not allowed to do because he's getting personal benefit out of that. And you're not allowed to receive, and you can't receive a painting in exchange for a grant when you're a foundation. And also, he was bidding it himself. And then basically no one wanted the painting after that. I think it's my favorite part of the story. Just down the street from us here, the most popular portrait in town is a painting of a president, right? Generally, these are really sought after pieces of art. There are probably a lot of other families with foundations doing this kind of behavior. And the only real reason that Trump got caught with this stuff is because he ran and got elected and people started paying more attention, which means to me that there's probably a lot of other foundations doing the same behavior, maybe not necessarily buying portraits of themselves, but almost certainly buying tickets to events and doing other things that foundations aren't set up for. And foundations are great. They can move mountains. The grants fund our work. A lot of them are going the extra mile to stay in terrific compliance. And so it makes me a little upset when I see others, right, sort of sullying the field of philanthropy. There are a lot of people out there rightfully criticizing big dollar donors and galas of this sort and all that sort of thing. And this sort of activity just doesn't help our work. Let's go to the next slide. The other thing you can see with the foundation filing is donations. These are some donations that have been made to the Trump Foundation over the years. Your guess is as good as mine on some of these. I believe he got roasted on Comedy Central once, and I assume that's what this is about. And I guess he probably participated in Celebrity Fight Night once, and that's what that was about. And the world, he got $4 million from the World Wrestling Entertainment. By far, the biggest donor to the Donald Trump Foundation is WWE, World Wrestling. I believe he used to be a character on some of the wrestling programs or whatever. The most random thing I found in the 990s as I looked through all of them was a $6,000 gift from Lee Iacocca Assad that he made in 2004. Your guess is as good as mine as to why. If you don't know who Lee Iacocca is, he is the former chairman of Chrysler and Ford Motor Company. He was fairly involved in Nixon's campaign for president, I believe. It's very strange. It's the only time he ever gave to Trump. I couldn't find any evidence that they knew each other or interacted much. But at one point, he gave $6,000 to the foundation. I really don't know what that could be about, but it's in there. And so there's a lot. These are just a couple that I pulled that you can see. There's also if you look at the 19 admissions, a lot of the stuff that he was doing that was inappropriate was around events. There's this group called Richard Eber's Sports Management Group. And the way that what he would do there is he would hire them to run a golf tournament. The golf tournament would be on one of his properties. And he would sell tickets, and he would tell people that the proceeds from the tickets were going to St. Jude's Hospital or to a veterans group or something. And then after the event, the Trump property would just send invoices, and the money would end up going to the Trump property instead of to St. Jude's or to a veterans charity or whatever. That sort of activity is what really got them noticed. And then the New York Attorney General's office, once they decide to get you, they're going to get you. Let's go on to the. Is there anything more on the giving vehicles? Yes, terrific. So this is my presentation. It went a little faster than I thought it would. I guess I was talking slower when I did my run through yesterday, which means we've got a good amount of time for questions from everybody. I'm happy to talk about, can we just go back to the front slide? Just so I'm not looking at teal. So I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have about researching nonprofits or looking at 990s, but I'm the founder and this is the first session of the symposium, so I'm happy to answer any questions folks have just in general. Particularly those of you who are evaluators, which is most of you. I know we provide you with a proposal and some information about the organization. We don't show you years worth of 990s and do a bunch of we don't do that. I know a lot of the evaluators on the committee do their own research about the groups that we're reviewing. We will, if you've got a question, chat it, and the moderators can then, I believe, unmute you and perhaps bring you up. Anyone? we really not have any? Interesting. All right then. Nobody wants to start? Okay, it's all right. Someone is, we'll have a question, I believe, soon from Anne. Ted, feel free to throw that out. Is there an international equivalent to a 990? Yeah, so no, I don't believe so. A couple thoughts. So there are, I mean, it becomes very difficult to research nonprofits that don't have any kind of entity based in the US. However, that's pretty rare because if you want to receive gifts from American-based donors, which is a lot of the donors, you're going to need to have this paperwork. So there are, so like for instance, BRAC is a very large nonprofit. I believe they're based in Bangladesh. It's one of the largest in the world. But they actually have a desk here in DC as well because they have to maintain an American entity. Yes, so in Canada, and Christina, if I remember correctly, you work at a foundation in Canada. So you probably know what you're talking about. Christina, is it true that you can look up, so is there like a form, if it's a Canadian-based nonprofit, you can go to the CRA and look up their return? Is that true?
Yeah, that's what we end up doing through ours. When we ask for our submissions, we ask for the registration number, and then we generally search based on the registration number for that.
Yes, thank you for saying that. So there's a number, we have a number that's called EIN, which is your employee identification number. You go to the IRS and they assign you one. And so I don't know, I have not memorized my REIN. It starts with 82. I remember that. But that's, you type in REIN, and that's how you look us up. Every single nonprofit has a unique individual one. It's the same. It's basically the organizational equivalent of a social security number. So it's good to know that. But in my experience, though, if there's a nonprofit, it's a large enough one, and even if it's based in Canada, it probably does have an entity in the US. Same with Europe or Africa or anything else, because, right, that's the reason for having an entity in the US is to receive gifts from American donors. If you're a foundation, if you're a 501c3 private foundation in the US, like the Donald Trump Foundation, your grants have to go to registered 501c3s. So you have a 5% requirement, and the gifts you can give money to someone who's not a 501c3, but it won't count towards your 5%. And so for that reason, even international groups almost always have an American filing. Sometimes, so like for instance, in Israel, for instance, most of the universities will set up a committee called Friends of Ben Gurion University that's based in Manhattan, so they can like raise money, right, from, you know, American folks that care about that university. Okay. So Anne Stouffer has a question. As evaluator, I wonder how much research to do, wondering whether I'm supposed to evaluate based on what the organization has presented or look deeper to figure out what they are doing. Also, because don't know with co-evaluation of the other org, like MIT Solve, will be judging based only on materials submitted or also doing their own research. Okay, as expected, this is a great question from Anne, who is a terrific evaluator. Right, and so I have a few thoughts here. So basically, Anna's asking like how much more extra research should she do? We have, and in my position here, I read all the proposals that come in, and I read all of the feedback on all of the proposals that come in. And in general, I'm very confident in your ability to provide, in all of your ability to provide helpful feedback. People who come to us on the committee tend to know what they're doing, tend to have their own mindset about these sorts of things. This is probably not the first proposal a lot of you have reviewed, right? And if you have your own way of doing things, I very much want you. Is that true, Mom? That's his. Oh yeah, I guess this makes sense. That's why the Assad is there. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification, Mother. All right, so sorry, back to Anne's question. So if you So some of the evaluators, they only read the proposal and the information that was provided. And then in their evaluation, they'll be like, I wanted to know this, I wanted to know that, I didn't get it. And that information is like, it could have been found, but it wasn't in the submission. And so I would say like there's logic to both approaches. Some evaluators will evaluate only what they're shown through our program, and they'll consider that fair because that's probably what reviewers at Grantmakers do. If you send a proposal off to Ford Foundation, the proposal officer there, the program officer there is probably not going to go out of their way to get extra answers quick. They're going to want all the information to be in the proposal. So like you're giving them like a realistic review, right? However, I think I can hear the other option, right? We're trying to be helpful for that next application, make sure they know all of the things that they might be missing, right? And so it tends to work out because we have evaluators of all kinds, and because every proposal gets reviewed by different groups. Some of you do deep research, and those reviews, right, have that, include that information. That's very helpful. Others, right, don't do that research and point out that information was missing. That review is very helpful, right? So I would say, like, trust yourself, trust how you do it. But right, I did want to make sure everyone at least knows like the basics of how to look this information up and make tests there. And then Anne's other question was around like, so like when we're co-reviewing, just to explain very quickly, most of the proposals we review, someone applied to a grant maker, and then they opted in to be reviewed by us. We call that co-review. Our biggest co-review partner is MIT Solve. So people apply to various challenges at Solve, then they opt in to be reviewed by us, right? MIT has a bunch of steps in their process, and we meet with them pretty regularly and try to, even though we're not involved in making the decisions, try to understand how that works, right? So there's a staff level shortlisting in the beginning, right, where folks are just trying to figure out like if they're eligible, do they answer all the questions, that sort of thing. Then it gets a little bit more rigorous to the semifinal round, and then like VIP judges come in and choose those winners and everything, and like it's a little arbitrary. Pretty much every grant maker, there's like, there's going to be some rhyme or reason to it, procedures that get followed, but it's also human beings making decisions. So some of those folks may be doing a lot of research or whatever. Like when we're co-reviewing for Solve, I would say like don't try not to spend too much time thinking about like what Solve did in their review, right? Because that's happened. They're going to go through the Solve program. They're going to get all the stuff that Solve does for them. Same if they applied to Kettering or one of the other giving circles, right? Our process is very independent from that. And it probably makes sense for us to be going a little bit deeper, doing a little bit more research than the normal program officer or grant making program would, right? Because our goal is not to choose winners, but to be as helpful as possible to all the proposals that come in. All right, we've got a few other questions in here. First from Sue Griffey. Hello, Sue. First of all, thank you for coming. Sorry you couldn't join us in person. You were at both you and Anne at our event in person last year, 2 years ago. Yeah, anyway, long time. Sue asks, can you talk about the general profile of unfunded submissions as to how many are from 501c3 orgs versus those that don't have a legal status as of yet? I know that I've evaluated a proposal that was from an independent researcher or programmer. Yes, the majority of them are at current organizations of some kind, probably 501c3s, but possibly a business, or they're fiscally sponsored by a 501c3. Sometimes it's just an individual, especially when we get concept notes, people who are like haven't started doing the work yet. Those are like, there is no entity behind that. Like you're not going to be able to do the research as well. This is something we actually are going to talk about a little bit later when we're talking about donor advised funds and some of the other sessions. A foundation has its own return. You can look up that foundation and see the full grants list. A donor advised fund, their finances are mixed with a variety of other grant makers. So the research becomes much more difficult to do. And as there's like a lot more social enterprises formed that are B Corps or fiscally sponsored or some other form of entity, it becomes a little bit more difficult for folks like us to do the research. Personally, I think if you're like doing civil society work, right, your tax return should be public so that the public can assess that, and journalists can look into the info and all of that. But I don't necessarily get everything that I want. Yeah, I would say so. Like, if it's not like if you're looking at an organization that is not yet formed, not a 501c3, that it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do a lot of research into the organization because it hasn't really been formed yet. So, and you won't be able to anyway. So, if you're reviewing a proposal that is not a 501c3 or is like before formation, right, you probably can spend less time looking up. Maybe look up the individual. I always like try to look at the person's LinkedIn profile to like know what they're up to and that sort of stuff. LinkedIn's very good for like getting information about this. So Ted has our next question. Many of the things that the Trump Foundation does are done by many foundations. Absolutely agree. Some of it was pretty common behavior, but due to the lack of oversight by the IRS or the lack of resources, they get away with it. Most of us can go through a 990 and find things like this pretty easily. You're right. There are a lot of organizations. I can look at the 990 and I'm like, look, crime, right? Like it's a kind of that most nonprofits are terrific. There are some bad actors though, and it is actually pretty easy to see that bad acting in the 990. What are the chances that more resources would put towards enforcement by Congress? There isn't. Are there other ways to press to get some sort of enforcement? So we are hearing, we have a legislative reform panel tomorrow where we have someone from Senator Angus King's office. Senator King has put forward some bills. One is about donor advised fund reform, and another is about better funding the IRS. These are, it's not just that he's in the senator's in favor of those things. These are, he is championing these issues. In fact, there was an article in the New York Times a few weeks ago that we read, which is why we reached out. And so we'll have him speaking tomorrow. Also, we'll have Maria Wan, who's from Issue Voter, which is an organization that helps people like get active on issues. I will say that during the 2018 tax bill, the civil society was not really heard from as much as I would have liked as to what the reform went in there. And same with the CARES Act. And in general, the stuff that was in there for us was for larger nonprofits and didn't really benefit the small ones very much. But there's plenty of, I think we're going to do some tax reform in the coming years. And I do think there's a lot of opportunity to see some regulations that could help us. But civil society will need to use their voice. The theme of the symposium is listen, learn, speak, and speak very much. You should speak whenever appropriate, and that definitely includes to your elected officials, especially if you're working in this sector. The nonprofit sector is a very large portion of the economy. I've heard it's like 20% of the U.S. economy. So we should be listened to when we talk about what we'd like to see in tax returns. There were some large advocacy groups, independent sector, and Council on Foundations. In 2018, they did not advocate to better fund the IRS or to regulate DAFs. In fact, the opposite. And I believe they've adjusted their thinking on that, but like those are the two groups, and that's really all Capitol Hill heard from. They should definitely be here. If you run a nonprofit, you should try to make yourself familiar with these issues, try to make sure foundations are acting appropriately and stuff will be in your best interest, especially for us smaller nonprofits. Because actually this kind of graft benefits the larger ones that are able to have fancy galas and sell off art, do art auctions at Mar-a-Lago. We're not, here at Unfundless, we're not in danger of having any galas, any Mar-a-Lago type places anytime soon. So I think there will be some, I definitely think there will be some regulation that affects 990s and 501c3s in the next 10 or 20 years. What that regulation includes will be anyone's guess. And I think that the most important thing I would say is that we should all make sure we hear our voices heard. I live in DC, I don't have a senator, I don't have a congressman. Those of you who are not Canadian and do live in one of the states, please make sure to make your voice heard on this. There is going to be legislation introduced in the Senate. I would also say, it's much more likely to see some changes happen at the local level. Trump's Foundation got caught by the New York Attorney General, not by the IRS. And state level, the states, they collect tax revenue too. So they're going to pay attention to tax exempt organizations. Definitely try to at least know your, at least make sure to know your elected officials, particularly if there's elected officials that's a very good question. Mother, I don't know which congressional committee has oversight of nonprofits. It would be the one that has, I guess it would be the one that has IRS, the oversight of the IRS. The bills that Senator King is talking about are like IRS regulatory bills. I live in DC and I have for a long time, but I've never worked on the Hill. I'm not much of a legislation guy. I'm regularly, generally informed or whatever. But I mean, you certainly contact your local folks, your local congressman and senator, but your state level people as well. Nonprofits, as of the 2018 CARES Act, we now have to have local charitable solicitation license. We have to have local registration in a variety of states. Unfunded List is registered in North Carolina, New York, California, Virginia, a bunch of states. It's actually a little bit confusing right now how that works. I believe the law says we're supposed to have local solicitation license anywhere we're fundraising. And technically, if I have a donate button on my website, which can be seen from everywhere, so I should have a local registration in all 50 states plus Guam plus, and that's just not very realistic. I don't think every state even offers it. So, but that's a new thing as of 2018. I don't think anyone's in compliance on that. Let's see here. Sue, you're helping out Issue Voter. I didn't know that. That's very interesting. And that's great. We like when our evaluators connect with folks. Asking about physical meetings. So yes, we often used to. James has asked when evaluation starts and if it's possible of having any physical meetings. We used to meet in person all the time. We had the evaluator summits right before the pandemic shut everything down. We used to do unfunded university events. We would also show up to other people's events and do interviews and do lots of stuff. I love the opportunity to meet in person. I'd love to come to Uganda and talk to you about your grant proposals. I would really love to be able to do that sort of thing. We've been on lockdown the last year, and actually we were hoping to have more people in person this week, but I think I think somebody even mentioned in the chat, the Delta variant, I think, kind of tampered people's enthusiasm. Thank you very much for those of you who showed up in person. This is pretty interesting. We are, for the in-person folks, they are all in the room over there. Hello, everyone. I'm next door to them in the speaker room. If you're in DC, it's still time. Come on down and join us. We've got coffee and everything. Another question from Sue. I'm surprised at how few of the submitters take up on the offer to meet further to discuss my review. So yes, thank you for mentioning this question, Sue. This is a feature that is not working as well as I had hoped from the beginning, right? So when you're reviewing a proposal, I believe someone actually asked about timelines, which I'll do first. So the submission deadline, if you want to submit a proposal to us, is August 10th, right? If you've written a proposal, you want feedback from the committee, get it to us by August 10th. You go to our website and it's pretty clear how to submit there. The co-review partners will then take the rest of August to get their proposals over to us. That works. So basically just depending on the review partner, we share the opt-in offer and people opt in. Margaret and I will have all the proposals by the end of August, and we will make assignments to all of you by September 5th. So you're evaluating, you'll get the assignments by September 5th, and then you'll have until October 23rd to do your review. And we're going to try to get the reports out on November 1st. When you're reviewing, if you're excited about the group and you would like to speak to them, this is very encouraged. When evaluators do it, they follow up to me and they say thank you. They really enjoyed it. Sue followed up with Issue Voter a few years ago and is now a volunteer for that organization, helping them bring interns on and all that. People who have followed up with Sue, it's been to their benefit. And you're right, I am also surprised that not everyone takes them up on that offer. When we at the end of the round, we're putting the reports together, we look at all the offers that got made, and we do our best to follow up on them. Sometimes the follow-up offer is like, I'm interested in funding this organization. Please connect them with me to the grant. And this does kind of boggle my mind. Sometimes the unfunded don't follow up on that. So just to be clear, the report that they got includes a review from a funder who says, I'm interested in possibly funding this, and would they meet with me? And then they don't actually follow up. I can't make them. I don't really know what's going on in their lives. The reports are long. It's difficult. Not everyone reacts to critical feedback in the same way. What I do know is that the organizations that read the report and follow up on those commitment offers and take the report discussion with Margaret and I are the ones that get the most benefit, right? And Issue Voter is a great example, right? She followed up on all the commitments offers. She goes to the report discussion. She's very thorough on it. I think some people apply, and the only reason they really applied is because they thought I'm going to connect them to a donor. So they don't really read the feedback, and unless the offer was, here's money, they're not going to follow up on that, which is fine. That's their decision. We can't force, we give them feedback. They go off on their own, right? The ones who benefit the most are the ones who like engage, and quite frankly, the ones who have benefited the most are here. They join the evaluation committee. They're in the audience as well. The more you get engaged with us, the better it's going to help with your fundraising. That's what I have to say about that. And then Sue, a specific suggestion, Sue. When you tend to make an offer to follow up with like everybody you review, which is terrific. But like your offer to follow up is I think a little bit, they're not specific, right? It's just like, I think you're right. And I'm not, this isn't a criticism. I'm just trying to explain what I think is happening. But you and a lot of the other evaluators will write, like, I'd be happy to have a follow-up conversation, right? They don't know what would happen in the follow-up conversation. They're not really sure what they're going to talk to or why they would do that. And so they don't follow up on it. When those commitment offers are like very specific, that's when they're more likely to be followed up on. Like, so Marquetta, who's speaking a little bit, last round, she wrote, I'd be happy to have my team do grant research, prospect research for you one time. We'll identify targets for you, right? Very, very specific offer she made. And so the guy from Warday Woods, that's what we wanted. So we did follow up on that, and Marquetta's team has been doing that sort of thing. We do our best to try to make, and thanks for that info. I think that's probably true. You've probably offered about 15 to 20 follow-ups. You've only spoken to 3 of them. I'd say it's actually pretty good. Like, it is a lot of folks. It's just sort of unfortunate. Like, lots of times we send the report and then I don't ever hear from them again. I don't know if they read it. I don't know if it was useful. I hope that it was, right? But there's a lot of people. And I think, shout out to Heather Morgan and Sarah McIntosh, who are here from Mary Center. They send us a proposal every 6 months. They always do the report discussion. They always follow up with evaluators who want to talk, even if the evaluator just wants to talk, right? It's not going to necessarily lead to a grant. But yep. And thank you for that, Christina. That's very interesting. It is. I would really love it if more folks followed up on it. But I also understand that it's difficult to talk about critical feedback. There's a problem in civil society that my dad would call happy horse shit. It's like everything's positive all the time. So the press release style of communication, right? And sometimes they look at the report, and our report is not happy horse shit. Like it's even if the program's great, sometimes evaluators will zoom in on something you're doing wrong, and it's fairly critical. These aren't public documents. They're not like meant to be press releases. But like sometimes they don't want to engage that negative information. Or when they get in the call with Margaret or I, this is something that Margaret and I are getting better at dealing with. Sometimes they show up to the report discussion and the only thing they want to do is like correct the evaluators. So they have a list of like why the evaluators are wrong, and they're just going to prove to us why they're wrong in this report discussion. And like, I'll let them do it, but it doesn't really matter if they're wrong or not, right? This is a real reaction to your proposal. Next time you write a proposal, you can be aware that reaction happens. But to them, it's a ding. Any negative, like that's the term that Margaret and I use a lot. It's a ding against them because the evaluator made a critical comment, right? And I mean, they should be excited that they've heard it, and then now they know about it and they can move forward and all that. But like, and I will say it also depends quite a bit on like the culture that the proposal writer comes from. Different parts of the world handle critical feedback very, very different. Some places it's like it's inappropriate. How dare you criticize these people, right? And others, they know that that's how they grow and learn. Cultural competency is a really important part of those report discussions. And one of the most, I worked for an international exchange program with civil society folks, came from all over the world to Washington, D.C., usually coming to America for their first time. And that experience is very, very useful for me for giving the critical feedback, right? Because it's people from different parts of the world react very, very differently to all this stuff. That's a really important part of giving feedback. And I would say if you're reviewing, you can make some, try to remember where they're from, that sort of thing. Let's see here. Looks like we've got the follow-up feedback is extremely helpful, Heather says. Highly recommend, yes. And actually, we have some good examples from that later today in the feedback on the feedback panel. Alexis Fish from Blackbaud, hello. Has there been any feedback from the nonprofits that after they go through the unfunded application review, that they then note on future applications to foundations that they've gone through the process, that kind of stamp of approval? Interesting. I'm not aware of it. I believe it's probably true that someone is like mentioned. So like I can imagine someone applied somewhere, and the question was something about like how do you do monitoring and evaluation and that sort of thing. And I think if you are being regularly reviewed, it would make sense to mention that you get reviewed by unfunded list as part of your regular monitor. I've never seen that. I wouldn't be surprised if this happens. I thought that I named it unfunded list because I actually thought the publishing of the list was going to be like one of the biggest parts of the program. And in fact, it is a big part of the program. Most of the people who go to our list of published proposals are people who are like trying to learn the right format for a proposal. It's not funders looking for proposals to fund. I think it's a very useful educational tool, but it's just not what I had originally intended. I used to be involved in an organization called the Slingshot Fund. And there we would highlight 40 organizations in a guide and distribute that guide to funders every year. And with that program, everyone would very much put a stamp, that the Slingshot stamp on their website to like indicate that they had that stamp of approval, and it was very helpful for them. That doesn't really seem to have happened here. But I think that could increase as things go forward. It definitely helps you with certain grant makers. So we've been co-reviewing with Solve and Elevate for a while. And one of the things we know is that if you've been reviewed by us, you're just way more likely to win those things. It's like well over 70% of the winners last year of all those challenges had been reviewed by us previously. And we're learning more about that the more we do co-review with the same program year after year. We get some really good data information out of that. But sometimes, Alexis, and this is very understandable, they don't want, like I said, there's a happy horseshit problem. So forgive my vulgarity. This is I don't know if you knew that this is an adults conference, not a family event. I'm sorry that they're going to learn about horseshit eventually, the kids. So we might as well learn now. Sometimes, so they don't necessarily want to go out and then like advocate to the world that their proposal was flawed and they needed feedback on it, right? So they don't necessarily and they don't necessarily want to broadcast that they're unfunded, right? Sometimes we call them the unfunded, and I've learned that we have to call them that behind their back. They don't really want to be called that. I think, thanks for mentioning that, Mom. I agree with all the ladies. And I think this is sort of a big task for us, right? We live in a society that sort of assumes that your first grant proposal will be perfect and you'll just get the grant and everything will be fine, right? I think we all know here that the reality is a little bit more muddled. Your first draft will need some work, right? It's going to be a little bit more difficult, and changing the culture to be more accepting of, right, rough drafts and people who are still working on their proposal and critical feedback. Right, we live in a culture where if you get a B+, you argue it up to an A, right? And that's a lot of the people who come to us. That's what they're used to doing. Hello, Sunny. Enjoying the symposium? All right. Do we have any other questions? It's been really great. I appreciate those of you who have shown up. Really talented folks. Alexis is from Blackbaud, and Sue is a mentoring expert, and Anne works at Pew. These are really terrific questions beginning from everybody. How are we on time? Oh, good. We've got the next session coming up. That's terrific. Any final questions about the process or researching nonprofits? Otherwise, I will. Okay. See you later, Sue. Christina, about 30 to 40% are declined eligibility issues. Yes. So yeah, in general, I call that a lot of the folks we co-review with, it's the same thing. They sort of call that shortlisting, right? And in fact, there are some grant making programs, and I'm not a fan of this trend, that use AI and machine learning to do that original round of shortlisting. So it's not just like making sure all the boxes are checked, but like sometimes the AI is actually reading like paragraph answers and determining that the application is not a fit. Someone from last round told me that they got rejected that way, and they were told by the grant maker that they didn't get past the AI shortlisting, which is that's just, it's called humanitarian work. I generally think humans should be reading the grant proposals. But I'm not an expert on AI. Maybe they are better than me. One thing I do know for certain is that our next batch of speakers are all more experienced and better than I am when it comes to grant proposal writing, and have worked with a lot more folks than I have, and have a lot of experience answering questions on grant proposals.